Welcome to Woeful Wednesdays. Nathan reads a series of unfortunate events. Ignore the tattoo. This week, we are talking about Book the Third, The Wide Window, and we are talking about the last 5 chapters of the book, chapters 9 to 13. So the last third or so of the book. My name is Nathan.
And I'm Tyler.
So if you are unfamiliar with this, I'm reading the books for the first time. Tyler, you read them when you were pre-adolescent, and you really enjoy them. I'm just experiencing them for the first time, and we're kind of documenting how it goes as we read through this together. And I really do encourage you folks to read along with us. You can see how we're doing this, that we're breaking each book up into thirds, into 3 different parts. So chapters 1 to 4, 5 to 8, 9 to 13, and then we post a video a week on Wednesday, because Wednesdays are, of course, very, very woeful days.
Yeah, absolutely. Middle of the week, nobody likes them.
Exactly. Yeah, we are going to redefine how people think of Wednesdays as a result of this podcast. A lot of people call it Hump Day. Not anymore. Take that, camels. It is now Woeful Wednesdays. It's going to catch on. I'm sure that we're going to have a huge cultural impact from this.
Oh, yeah, because we have such an impact already.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. It's hard to imagine we can get bigger than we already are, but somehow I think we haven't quite reached our ceiling. So Now, before we get into the podcast, I got to ask, because safety first, when was the last time you had something to eat?
It was probably about, I don't know, a half hour ago.
Tyler, a half hour ago? Are you crazy?
What do you mean?
We can't podcast if you ate only 30 minutes ago.
Oh, right. Cramps, right?
Not cramps. Are you crazy? You're going to catch a computer virus. Those computer viruses are attracted to food in your stomach. They can smell it, and it's going to infect your machine, and it's going to infect my machine, and anybody who's watching. You are endangering the entire network of computers in the 21st century with this reckless behavior.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, we could stop the recording and start again in a half hour, but you know what? I mean, we already started. I think we should just keep going.
I guess we'll risk it. We'll risk it. If you folks did not catch that, you haven't read the chapters for the week. Leeches can smell anything in your stomach, so that's why you don't eat before you go out to sea or go out to the lake. Go out to lake? I don't know. Because it's not a sea.
Right.
In any case, we do have a sponsor for this week. So this is our first legitimate sponsor. Yeah, it really is the first legitimate sponsor. Because Aunt Josephine is so scared of realtors, we have got a lovely realtor who has decided to sponsor the podcast, which is me. In addition to being a professor and an author and a podcaster and several other things, that I also am a real estate agent. So if you're looking to buy or sell any property in Central Florida, then use any of the links below in the description in order to contact me, and I can help you find something to buy or something to sell legitimately. That's a legitimate sponsor that we have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't have a need for a realtor, but unless you are terrified of realtors, go with Nathan.
Yeah, exactly. Or even if you're terrified of realtors, you should still go with me.
Yeah, treat him as if he's just a teacher who happens to be helping you.
Exactly. That's exactly it. All right, folks, I hope you enjoy. Ignore the tattoo! Nathan unfortunately reads a series of unfortunate events at an unfortunate age, which in this case is being used to indicate that he is entirely too old to be reading this for the first time. All right, so we are talking about chapters 9 to 13 in Book the Third, The Wide Window by Lemony Snicket, a series of unfortunate events. So you have got the plot summary for the last third of the book.
Yeah. So we're starting off in chapter 9 with the children heading back down the long hill. They have to try to get across Curdled Cave. And in order to do that, the best way to get across the lake during a hurricane is with a sailboat, because the ferry is not running.
Mm-hmm. Seems safe.
Yeah. So they do try to get a sailboat from a rental place, but of course it is Captain Sham's rental place, and we have the person who looks like neither a man nor a woman, who is holding the keys to the gate, and they are trying to steal this sailboat. Um, yeah, and Sunny ends up going in, getting the keys. The person wakes up because of thunder. And yeah, anyway, they are able to get the sailboat. Um, and they sail across to Aunt Josephine. And Aunt Josephine uh, expects them to live in Curdled Cave,
Mm-hmm.
um, and expects them to have brought some groceries, which they have not. And the only way that they can get Aunt Josephine to leave Curdled Cave is by mentioning that Curdled Cave is for sale. And so, of course, there are realtors coming. Um, and she is horrified by this idea. So does set sail with them, is terrified on the water, even though it is no longer a hurricane going on.
Just like that, it
Um,
was gone.
yep. And then yeah, then they get into the Leech territory, the Lachrymose Leech territory, and Aunt Josephine reveals that she had a banana just before they left. Um,
Reckless.
yep, yep. But luckily, they are able to create a signaling device and get some attention from Captain Sham. Oh no. So he decides to save the children, but not Aunt Josephine. Then Aunt Josephine corrects. Sorry. Then he changes his mind, says, "Sure, I'll save you." Then Aunt Josephine corrects his grammar, and instantly, uh, Captain Sham says, "Never mind. You're going to stay here on the sinking ship." And yeah, then she is left to the leeches.
Hmm?
They get back to the dock and they find Mr. Poe there. They try to explain everything to him, but he's confused about apostrophes and everything. Uh, and then Sonny bites through the fake peg leg,
Mm-hmm.
revealing Count Olaf's tattoo. And then Mr. Poe says, "Oh, come now, that won't work," to several different things that that Count Olaf tries. And then Count Olaf runs away, locking them behind the gate on the dock.
Yes. Well done. That
Thank you.
yes, that was a very good summary for the last third of this book. All
Yeah.
right.
I didn't realize how detailed everything is in those last five chapters until I started talking about it, because there is a lot that happens that,
There is.
yeah,
There
you can't
is.
really.
Unlike
Yeah.
books one and two, because books one and
Hmm.
two, there's not a lot that happens in the last third. But in
Yeah.
this, there really is. All right, so sorry about the little cut in there. Tyler's internet kind of wandered off, and I was just commenting about this whole issue with the sneezing. I insist that I really did push the mute button on this thing, but it just didn't register. So we've got, me being the very first legitimate sponsor. I'm also the very first one to audibly sneeze on the podcast. So
Right.
that's great for my reputation. It's yeah, hire me for buying or selling real estate. The dude knows how to sneeze. Maybe that should be my slogan. I'll put it on my
Right.
business cards.
Yep.
Um, but in any case, chapter nine. So we'll let you go first with this, with your comments on chapter nine.
For sure. So I only have a couple of comments. The first is on page 137. Um, Let me see. 136 into 137, so last paragraph on 136, with the description here. Stealing, of course, is a crime and a very impolite thing to do, but like most impolite things, it is excusable under certain circumstances. Stealing is not excusable if, for instance, you are in a museum and you decide that a certain painting would look better in your house, and you simply grab the painting and take it there. But if you were very, very hungry and you had no way of obtaining money, it might be excusable to grab the painting, take it to your house, and eat it. It's just such a fun little turn there that I was not expecting where that joke was going.
Yes, it really is. And this is another instance where it feels very much in the mode of what you get with Amelia Bedelia, where Lemony Snicket, he kind of gets it, and you're like, oh, he's figured it out this time. He's going to give us a good example of
Yeah.
why stealing might be okay. And then because with Amelia Bedelia, then she takes things too literally. So he's taking part of this literally of like, well, why would it be okay to steal? And he's like, so here's why it's not okay to steal. Here's why it would be okay to steal. And then it's like, you missed it. You were so close.
Yeah.
You were so close, and then you missed it. And it's kind of fun having a narrator where Daniel Handler is taking on this persona of Lemony Snicket, who exists within the world of a series of unfortunate events, which is different from our world. It's fun having this persona who's really out of it, who's just kind of like, you know what I mean? It's the kind of stupid person who thinks they're really smart. And that is such a fun little thing. Kind of like a Michael Scott type of character where he screws up these expressions all the time, right? And it's like he's heard the expression before, but he doesn't remember how it goes. So he just kind of ad libs, and it often is like, that's not it.
Yeah. Oh, how the turntables.
That's right.
Yeah, all right. So that's my one comment. The other comment that I have for chapter 9 is on page 141, which is the mention of Brobdingnagian, which is I had to look it up because it was not in my dictionary on my computer, so I had to Google it, and it is a reference to Gulliver's Travels, which I have not read, and it is by Jonathan Swift, who I know you have mentioned numerous times.
Right, yeah. And so this is like, listen, folks, this is a little bit behind the scenes. We weren't recording for part of this, so we had a good discussion about Jonathan Swift and Gulliver's Travels, and we're trying to replicate this. But and that doesn't, like, normally this is entirely spontaneous, but just we're having technical issues today, which is fine. But yeah, so I was very disappointed to find out that you did not make the connection between my constant references to Jonathan Swift on the podcast and the fact that we get an outright reference to Jonathan Swift, because I go out of my way to bring up Jonathan Swift all the time, because if you're unfamiliar with him, he is the Anglo-Irish writer from I feel like I'm gonna like totally screw it up, but 18th century 17th or 18th century, I can't remember.
18th century, I believe.
Okay.
1700s. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So anyway, and he, like, I love his stuff. I've read Gulliver's Travels, and so you have the land of the Brobdingnagians, and so that's like the giants, and then he travels to the land of Lilliput with the Lilliputians. So the people are really, really tiny there. He's regular sized. The Brobdingnagians, they're giant. He's regular sized, and he travels to different places, and it's all a satire in English society. And it makes perfect sense to me that Daniel Handler would like Jonathan Swift, because Jonathan Swift is a very transgressive writer where he will just completely cross boundaries in order for comedic effect, but really for satire. That he does kind of have a point, but in order to get there, he's going to say things that you really shouldn't say, and he's really going to push you because for instance, one of his short pieces of nonfiction is A Modest Proposal, and so a lot of people will read A Modest Proposal, but they might not read the full novel of Gulliver's Travels. But A Modest Proposal, basically, there's a whole bunch of English people who are, because they colonized Ireland. Ireland was the first colony of England before the 13 colonies in North America and all of that. Ireland was how they first figured out what works and what doesn't work when you colonize a country. Because we often think about Ireland and England as being like, it's all like Great Britain or the United Kingdom, but it's not really the United Kingdom. But they think about it like that way, and it's like, no, it's a very, very separate nation. And so anyway, the English had colonized it, and then they were very concerned with the conditions, the poverty, the level of poverty in Ireland. So then Swift writes this modest proposal where he says, here's what you need to do. The Irish people, because we're so concerned about them having so many children, then what we should do is just encourage them to eat their children. And then he then goes on and like provides recipes for how to cook babies. And I'm not kidding. All of these things and saying that will solve everything. And of course, people were horrified by this. But the satire there is, you care you supposedly care about them, but do you genuinely care about them? Like, you're more offended by the fact that I wrote this tract, this essay, that is facetiously pointing out a solution to the poverty that exists in Ireland. You're more offended by this than you are by the fact that people are genuinely starving in Ireland. Like, right. Your priorities are all screwed up. And so like a lot of sarcasm, a lot of satire, and kind of edgy comedy, but that's Jonathan Swift. So I don't think it's an insignificant thing that it comes up here, that Handler is including that in here. I certainly don't expect like 10-year-olds to get that.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm saying this is like one of those instances where I go, oh, okay, I can appreciate that.
Right. Yeah.
I've been, at least with the first book, I was disappointed because I had heard, no, it's fun for adults to read as well. And then I didn't find a lot in there that was fun, but I'm finding more as we're getting deeper into the series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I think is pretty standard for most children's or young adult fiction, where it gets more complex as it goes. Which, because it's growing with the audience, right? And the audience has to grow along with it. At least that's my understanding.
I think that's definitely part of it. I think the other thing too is from the publishing industry, from that standpoint, then it is way harder to convince a publisher to publish like a 400 or 500 page book than it is to convince them, especially if it's young adult. But for any author, if you're a debut novelist, trying to get them to publish something that big, they're typically unwilling to do it until they know that it's going to be successful. And so, because it's way more expensive. And typically you're going to charge the same cover price for a 400 or 500 page book as you would for a 200 or 300 page book. But there's way more paper that you physically have to print. And then shipping is a lot more expensive, because it's just heavier. And then in bookstores, there's less shelf space, that if they're going to give you this much shelf space and you could ordinarily fit 8 books that are 300 pages in length, then it's like, okay, but this one's 500 pages. We can only fit 4 or 5 in that amount of shelf space. And so usually once you prove there's an audience, publishers will get a little bit more lenient in terms of the length of what they're willing to publish for the series. So that's kind of a little bit of like the industry side of it. So you are right. Like, I'm sure that you're right, that's part of it, but I'm saying there's that industry side as well, that it could be that Handler or J.K. Rowling or whoever we're talking about with young adult initially maybe wanted to write longer, more complex books, but trying to sell that to a publisher is really hard as a debut novelist.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, but yes, so that was my only other comment for chapter 9.
Okay, so I've got really just one thing that I want to go over. And so this starts on page 135. So you have got, or I guess it's the bottom of 134 and then getting into 135. So this is in Captain Sham's sailboats, right? I forget again. What is it? Every boat has its own sail?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. And so then you've got this, one of Count Olaf's evil comrades is in there, supposedly guarding the place. And so the person is snoring. And this is from the bottom of 134, where it says, what frightened Violet was that you couldn't tell if this person was a man or a woman. There aren't very many people like that in the world, and Violet knew which one this was. And then it continues on. So you get that, and then you have another description at the bottom of page 139. Then it goes from saying it's this person and you can't tell if it's a man or a woman, and then 139, then it turns into, the description ends up being he, she, or it, where Violet says, "She's awake," Violet shrieked. "He's awake. It's awake. Hurry, Klaus. Open the gate and I'll try to distract it. So it goes from she, he, to then becoming an it. And then on page 140, it gets described as a creature. And then by 143, then this person ends up getting described as being a despicable creature. And then slipping on the atlas, then it says, in the dim light of the late afternoon, Klaus wiped the grime of the creature's foot off the cover of the atlas and began to read it. And so then it's like, well, does this thing literally grimy? Is that what you're saying? And so the grime of the creature's foot, it literally progresses. It goes from, this person, you can't tell if it's a man or a woman, to it becoming an it, to then becoming a creature, to then becoming a despicable creature, to then becoming a creature with grime on its foot. And so my comment with this, because I really don't know what to do with this, but I just wrote, certainly not a woke or PC description of transgender individuals or intersexed people. It is absolutely playing up the monstrousness of sexual ambiguity, where it's unclear what the sexual identity is of this creature. And I'm not saying that people should be appalled and offended. I'm certainly not going to moralize at people and tell them how they should react. And certainly when we're talking about art and a piece of literature, and that I feel like I've made it very clear that Lemony Snicket is a persona, and that is separate from Daniel Handler. So the way Snicket describes it is not necessarily what Handler believes, because you do have to make that distinction between the narrator and the author. They are not the same thing. And then beyond that, characters within the story do not necessarily represent the views of the author. So all of that stuff. But the selective outrage that exists right now, especially when it comes to issues surrounding the LGBTQ community, like they're staggering. And it's so shocking to me that this is in this book, and I've never heard people saying Handler is an opponent of transgender rights, that he hates transgender people or intersexed people. That like there's just I don't understand, because people have said far
more innocuous
they've made innocuous comments, and their reputation gets damaged for a long period of time or permanently. And this is so egregious in comparison to what some people get in trouble for, that it's staggering to me that this is here and people aren't like, there's not this whole, like I expected. Like I look at that and I'm like, okay, so then if I say I'm going to read a series of unfortunate events and I post it on Twitter, I mean, in part, I don't have a lot of attention being paid to my Twitter account, but I like, how it goes. Somebody says that, they're like, how dare you? He's a bigot. He's this. That's disgusting. How can you support that? Right? That's kind of, I look at this and I'm like, how is that not happening every time somebody mentions this book?
Right. Yeah. No, it is very surprising. And like you, I don't want to, tell people that they should or shouldn't be outraged by it. But it is surprising that it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
Especially at the top of page 136, then Violet describes what she sees. She says, "The one who looks like neither a man nor a woman," Violet replied. Klaus shuddered. "That's the scariest one."
Yeah.
But then Violet does say, "I think the bald one is scariest." So
yeah, I think you could make a whole bunch out of that if you were to really analyze that for Klaus as a young, pre-adolescent boy, that the most frightening thing of all is this person with an ambiguous sexual identity. That like, or at least, I mean, it is a sexual identity, but also a gender identity. That it's incredibly frightening for him. And to treat a person like that, like, this is such dehumanizing language for the person. And like, I'm honestly, because I read a lot of horror, and I genuinely, it takes so much to offend me. Like, I
Right.
am not easily offended at all as a reader, as a viewer of stuff. There's a lot of stuff where people will look at it and they'll just, they'll be offended and appalled. And I'll be like, nah, that wasn't that edgy. That didn't push it that far. Like, it was
Right.
fine, right? Like, and like, I'm not, it's genuinely like, I'm not boasting about that, but I'm saying that it takes a lot to offend me. And I'm not offended by this, but I'm going, that is very notable. This
Right.
whole description, like to literally dehumanize a person because you can't tell if it's a man or a woman, and then to then describe them as the scariest one of all and a creature with like a despicable creature with grime, that I'm like, that's a bit much.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
like, because there doesn't seem to be anything else that's monstrous about this person. Like, I mean, being very overweight, so that seems to be part of the, I don't know, the unsettling nature of this person.
Hmm.
But to just say, if I put that in one of my books, because I do write horror, so if my monster, if the scariest thing, or really the only scary thing about my monster, but I'm saying it is an absolute horror movie monster, is just you can't tell if it's a man or a woman. That's what's so scary. People would be like, number one, that's not really scary. Number two, you're a jerk. Like,
Right.
how does that make somebody a creature or a monster?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, no, it is again so surprising that there hasn't been outrage over it. And yeah, I don't want to say that there should be or anything, but it is surprising that there isn't. Um, and I kind of look at it as, you know, more or less that it's the person is monstrous because they are associated with Count Olaf. But yeah,
Yeah, I know, but
it
I think because the more that I look at it, the more evidence there is in the text that,
Mhm,
because Klaus does say that's the scariest one, and it's like, why?
right.
What makes this person so scary? And then they stop referring to this person as a person.
Yeah.
Like they do, like, they extract, like they deny humanity to this person. It's just, you are not a person anymore because you are, let's say, visually non-binary, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
that, I just think that's the kind of thing that you would maybe see, that you would see in early horror from like the 20th century, of, oh, that's what's so monstrous about this thing. But now anybody would look at this and say, like, that's such lazy writing. That doesn't make a person
Right.
scary. That doesn't make them a monster or a creature, and rightfully so, because it legitimately
Yes.
doesn't. Um,
Right.
but but I'm saying, like, I don't get, and I'm not saying that Handler believes this, but I'm
Mhm.
saying it sure seems that Snicket believes this.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
I
would
don't know
agree.
what to do with that as these, being children's books,
Yeah.
because I mean, because kids are merciless when it comes to teasing each other. And I don't think that, literature has to moralize in any way whatsoever. I don't think that's where we get our morals from. But at the same time, there's nothing that's really challenging that, of like, hey, you crossed a line, Violet or Klaus. Like,
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I would note is like we had just mentioned, Jonathan Swift and all this
yeah, yeah, yeah,
satire and exaggeration. So it could
yeah,
be something like that, where, he's pointing out how ridiculous it is
that
to
could
think
be.
of this creature as monstrous just because you don't know whether it's a man or a woman.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, I like that, because that's a
yeah,
good reading of it. It because it's just, it seems surprising to me, because this is just, it's so out of whack with how we describe people,
right.
that it does seem absurd. Like, this is absolutely absurd. You can't possibly mean that. Even for
Yeah,
your persona of Lemony Snicket can't possibly think that makes this person monstrous. That it should be laughable, where we go, okay, that's funny that you would be frightened by that.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, and like especially with like the creature, like holding Klaus in its mouth and everything, and it's just like, what?
Right. It becomes more of a creature the more you read.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's basically what I had to say with chapter 9.
Yeah, yeah, and I did want to quickly mention that in the Jim Carrey film, we'll leave the Netflix topic aside for the moment, but in the Jim Carrey film, then the way that person is portrayed is interesting in that it is split 50%, where
Right.
half of them is dressed in makeup and hairstyle and everything as a male, and the other half is female. Or more feminine, I should say, and more masculine on the other side. And so it is interesting that the way that they depict it in the film is not as non-binary, but as extremely binary.
Yes. Yeah. That
Yeah.
is so interesting. I'm so interested in that because I feel like that in a lot of ways works better,
Hmm.
right?
Right. Yeah.
But uh, because I don't know what else you would do other than like you get somebody
Yeah.
who it's just they're non-binary and then what the kids just look at this person and scream.
Right.
Like, and I think a lot of people would watch it and just be like, I don't get it. What's so scary? Because like I think it's just not frightening. So
Yeah.
I I don't know how you would show there's something up with this person if you
Right.
don't do something like that where have them identifying like on one side of their face as masculine and feminine on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah, the Netflix series kind of just shows a person with a I don't even know how to describe it. Like I believe the actor identifies as male, but I'm not sure. I don't
Okay.
want to jump to conclusions. But they do dress in dresses occasionally, and kind of goes back and forth, but it's not really like I don't think that they are ever mentioned as the one who looks neither like a man nor a woman. Um,
Right. Right.
so yeah, and honestly, they're not a very major character in the series. So it's yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's just I am curious though how because when you depict something visually, not just putting it in text, then it can really expose you to a lot of criticism because it's a lot easier. Like you can just screenshot that and then post it. Whereas it takes like I showed you, like you have to go through several pages and select different passages to
Yeah,
piece it together, and there's no picture. So I think in a lot of ways, literature is harder to be outraged by because of that. It just takes
right.
more work. And a lot of people want to easily be outraged.
Oh yeah,
At least, like, it sure seems like that online, like on Twitter. Then it's like they'll be completely offended by something that they've never watched, you know?
hmm yeah,
Like, we're certainly there's plenty of movies like that where people won't see it and then they'll say why it's such an awful film, and it's like you haven't even seen it but you get to be outraged by it. That's
right.
convenient.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to chapter 10.
Sure.
And I
I
guess
guess,
I'll let you do your notes
yeah,
this time.
I'll go first with this one. So I don't have a lot with this one. On page 154, when they reunite with Aunt Josephine,
Mhm.
then they get into the cave where Klaus, he says, Aunt Josephine, Klaus said hesitantly, we're here. Aunt Josephine looked up, and the children could see that her face was wet from tears and chalky from the cave. You figured it out, she said, wiping her eyes and standing up. I knew you could figure it out, she said, and took each of the Baudelaires in her arms. She looked at Violet and then at Klaus and then at Sonny, and the orphans looked at her and found themselves with tears in their own eyes as they greeted their guardian. It was as if they had not quite believed that Aunt Josephine's death was fake until they had seen her alive with their own eyes. And then Aunt Josephine says, I knew you were clever children. I knew you would read my message. Okay, is this like the first time that any adult in this series has recognized that these kids are smart?
Um, hmm. Well, I believe in the first book, then Count
Just,
Olaf says, "You think you're so clever." Um,
yeah.
but
I mean, like, an
yeah,
Uncle Monty recognizes that they're smart, but I'm saying this is not just, oh, you're very clever children. It's actually tasking them with something. that
Yes. Yeah.
she believes that they're not just clever intellectually, but they are capable, that they can actually
Right.
solve something. They can figure out how to get to her without tipping off Count Olaf, that she actually she believes that they are capable. And no
Yeah.
other adult, certainly Mr. Poe,
Right.
thinks that they couldn't be less capable. Um, and that he's so smart, which is this frustrating thing for the reader of like, they're so much smarter than you.
Yeah.
I just thought it was notable that,
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure.
yeah. Okay, and then the next part, this is on page 158, and starting with that main paragraph. The Baudelaires looked at one another in sadness and anger. They understood that Aunt Josephine was more concerned with grammatical mistakes and was saving the lives of the three children. They understood that she was so wrapped up in her own fears that she had not given a thought to what might have happened to them. They understood that Aunt Josephine had been a terrible guardian in leaving the children all by themselves in great danger. They understood, and they wished more than ever that their parents, who never would have run away and left them alone, had not been killed in that terrible fire which had begun all the misfortune in the Baudelaire lives. It's an interesting thing, because do you think that that's consistent with the text, that Aunt Josephine, she's more concerned with grammatical mistakes and was saving the lives of the three children? It does seem to be true here,
Mm.
but like, I mean, my point is she a terrible guardian, or is she just such a timid and fearful woman who's just overcome by her own fear that she can't take care of them in this moment? But not that she's choosing grammar over them. Because that's
Right.
what he's saying. Snicket here is saying that grammar is more important to her than the children. It's like, if that was the case, she would let them starve and force grammar lessons on them. But she does take care of them
Right.
until she's frightened away by Count Olaf.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah. No, I think that that's a good uh, point. That she she prioritizes grammar, but not at the expense of um, yeah, basic human decency or kindness.
Yeah,
Um,
that's saying that because he literally says here that she's more concerned with grammatical mistakes than with saving the lives of the three children.
yeah.
Like, and even if you argue that she does become that way in the
Hmm.
last part of the book, then it's like, okay, as much as we've got silly characters in these books, that's like the most absurd thing ever. Of,
Right.
like, I'm dying, please save my life. And it's, don't use contractions, I am dying. Right? Like, I
Right.
can't, like, it becomes so stupid. For like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of silly characters, and it's like, that might be the silliest of all.
Right.
Which is fine if he wants to do that. But at first, she's set up as being timid and fearful, but she genuinely cares for them. And then to change her character in such a short book, to change her character to say, oh, she doesn't care about them at all, at least not anywhere near as much as she cares about grammar. It
Hmm.
feels like an inconsistency, at least.
Yeah, I would say that that one sentence in particular is problematic. I think that the rest of that works really well. Uh, I understood that she was so wrapped up in her own fears that she had not given a thought to what might have happened to them. Well, she did give a thought because she wrote a note with
Yeah,
the secret message in it. So,
exactly.
hmm, yeah,
That's what I'm saying. That if she was more concerned with grammar than she was with saving the lives of the Baudelaire children, then she never would have written a note that was grammatically incorrect.
right.
But
Yep.
she wrote a note that was grammatically incorrect in order to help save them.
Yeah,
So she's not more concerned with grammar than she is with saving the lives of the children. But Snicket doesn't seem to get this, and it doesn't seem to be put in there for an ironic or humorous purpose, where it's like this is a
right.
complete inconsistency. It just seems to be, I want to say that now about her, so I'll just say that about her.
Right. Yeah, or at the very least, saying that that's how the Baudelaires see her at
Yeah,
this point, because
yeah.
it does say they understood, and
Yes, it is a little bit of close narration trying to provide some insight into their head. So
mhm,
yeah, yeah, that's
yeah,
fair. Um, the last part of the chapter, then you get the whole fear over realtors showing up, right? And that's
right.
how that's how they get her out of there. And so I don't know. I don't really know what to say beyond that. Which like I say, I already did the ad read as being a sponsor for it. But yeah, real estate agents are genuinely not that scary, folks. I could talk to you about real
Right.
estate for a while if you want. Um,
Shudder.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, it is such an interesting little detail to have that be her greatest fear.
Right, and I don't.
Scarier than going back across the lake, which I mean, she got across the lake somehow anyway, the first time.
Yeah. And I don't know. I don't think there's anything more to it other than just choose a random thing, right? Like what
Right.
people have,
Yeah.
have kind of like criticized Family Guy for in the past, where they're just like the way South Park criticized Family Guy of they just like almost like a lottery. Like they'll just like any reference, just like, okay, whatever pops up. This will be the reference that we're now going to use.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah. But
anyway,
of course, it is like that is mentioned at the beginning that she is terrified of realtors, and that's why she didn't sell her house, which is precariously perched at the top of that cliff.
yeah, no, I get it that it's set up, but I'm
Yeah.
just like I don't quite know what it is that about realtors other than this is convenient for her to be really, really scared of them.
Right.
I mean, there are a lot of people who genuinely don't like realtors, and they don't like the idea of giving a commission to a realtor. And this will be the only little thing that I'll say about it. But if you do really look into the research, that you're probably going to do better, even with the commission built in, than trying to sell a house on your own. Just saying, folks. I have researched this because I was skeptical, but it really does hold up. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's my own little like business thing. Just dropping it in there.
Yeah, no, for sure. Um, all right. So I only had one other comment for this chapter, which is on 157, when they are asking Aunt Josephine, "Why didn't you call the police?" Violet asked. "Why didn't you call Mr. Poe? Why didn't you call somebody who could have helped?" "You know why," Aunt Josephine said crossly. "I'm afraid of using the phone. Why, I was just getting used to answering it. I'm nowhere near ready to use the numbered buttons." But in any case, I didn't need to call anybody. I threw a footstool through the window and then sneaked out of the house. I left you the note so that you would know I wasn't really dead, but I hid my message so that Captain Sham wouldn't know I had escaped from him. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, just this idea of her, being too scared to use the numbered buttons on the phone because she's just gotten used to answering the phone and talking into it. I just think is really good. Um,
Yes, I agree. Can I comment on that as well?
yeah, for
Um,
sure.
okay. I threw a footstool through the window. Okay, first of all, I think it's interesting that she's too scared to push a button on the phone, but she's not scared of throwing a footstool and breaking the window like shattered glass and all of that. That's not frightening, but pushing a button on the phone is terrifying. First of all,
Yeah.
so I threw a footstool through the window and then sneaked out of the house.
Mhm.
Is that the right verb tense? Sneaked out of the house?
Uh, I I believe so. Snuck is not actually correct the correct past tense.
Are you
Uh,
sure? I don't
yeah,
like
no, I've looked it up, and snuck is actually
you're
a
kidding.
common misconception that it was not intended to be a word. It has recently been added to the dictionary, but sneaked is actually the correct past tense
Ooh,
form of the verb.
that is one of those things where as grammar, as the conventions of the English language have shifted over time, that is one of those that clearly should shift because there are some things that are grammatically correct but sound so wrong
Oh,
that
absolutely.
that does not sound right to me at all. But okay, so if that is the correct way of saying it, then fine. But ugh,
Yeah, I actually
boy, is
really
that
appreciate
clumsy.
that because I because I have publicly stated before that snuck is not actually a word and that sneaked is the correct word to use, um, as awkward as it may sound. And so I really appreciate that there's actually that detail of, oh, she used the correct word, even though nobody else would.
Yes, exactly, because nobody else would, and like, because that's kind of my perspective on it is language. Because when the thing that bugs me, this is just a little aside, but the thing that bugs me when people will say like that's a made up word, every word is made up.
Right.
There, we did not like go out into like nature and then we like just started digging and we had no language whatsoever, and then like we just like extracted this like thing, like this piece of text out of the ground, and we went balloon. Oh, okay, now balloon is a word. You know, you do it again, and you just like
Right.
you're like hello, like as like we invented all of them and we use them insofar as they're useful. And if they're not useful or if they sound clumsy as anything, then we change it. And
Yes.
so yeah,
Yeah.
when people get really hung up on that, and I'm saying this is somebody like I have 3 English degrees, and I'll go, no, if it doesn't work, I'm dispensing with it because that is the
Right.
language should be utilitarian. It should be functional. And if it's not functioning very well, then get rid of it or
Yeah,
change it.
yeah, yeah, no, for sure. It is th that is such an interesting case because I've looked it up and
Yeah, that is really
no
interesting. I was sure that it
nobody
was snuck, but okay.
n nobody can even figure out where the word snuck came from. Like it doesn't follow any other uh like grammatical rules that it's just so out there.
I don't know. I mean, like we do that all the time. Like we'll say like let's say with the word strike, you know, strike
Mm,
one, strike two, strike three, he struck out.
right.
Like that makes perfect sense. Like
Yeah,
because you if it was the present tense, you'd say he strikes out. But then the past tense is he struck out, not he
right.
striked out. Like
Right. Yeah.
because we do change it to struck.
Yeah, that's true. Um But all right, yeah. So that's that was my only other comment for chapter 10.
Okay. You go first, chapter 11.
All right. Let me see. I'm trying to make sure that like I'm not skipping ahead to chapter 12 here.
I know, because I don't have much for 11 at all.
Um, yeah, I only have a couple of notes on pages 178 and 179. Um, and so we have this nice moment of Sunny. Tintet, Sunny said, which meant something along the lines of, don't cry, you tried your best, but Violet cried anyway. It is very easy to say that the important thing is to try your best, but if you are in real trouble, the most important thing is not trying your best, but getting to safety.
Hmm.
I think that that is a good lesson
Mm-hmm.
because it is so common nowadays to just be like, oh, you tried your best, that's enough. And it's like, sometimes it's not enough.
Good point. Good point.
um, yeah, but then I do also really like that we get a lot of we actually get to see Violet talking about the scientific principles. Oh, well, not talking about, but using the scientific principles of the convergence and refraction of light, and even on 179, that last paragraph, um, where Lemony Snicket says, the scientific principles of the convergence and refraction of light are very confusing, and quite frankly, I can't make head or tail of them, even when my friend Dr. Lorenz explains them to me. And Dr. Lorenz is a reference to a real scientist. Um,
Oh, okay.
so, yeah, so it is interesting. Who did a lot of work with the refraction of light, uh, convergence
Naturally.
and
That makes
refraction.
sense.
Yeah. So that's just kind of a nice little detail. And that made me think, well, what about those other, friends that he's mentioned? Now I feel like I need to go back and look into them and see who that's a reference to.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so that was my only couple notes for chapter 11.
Okay. And I have none. I looked. I don't have any for chapter 11.
Okay.
So, all right, on to chapter 12.
Mhm.
Um, so the bottom of this is the very beginning of it. So this is page 183. This is when Captain Sham and Aunt Josephine, they're talking. And then, so Aunt Josephine, she says, well, like Count Olaf says to her, and you, Josephine, I thought you'd done the sensible thing and jumped out the window. And then she says, I tried to do the sensible thing, Aunt Josephine said sourly, but these children came and got me. It's wonderful that in her head, she is still convinced that throwing a footstool through the window, faking her own death, and then living in some cave is the sensible thing to do. And of course, right. It is completely silly, but it's so fun for her to continue to rationalize it and say that that's sensible. Like, yes, it genuinely made me laugh. The idea that that's sensible. Anyway, that's all that I just
children come and get me.
right, exactly. I was being sensible. I was being very mature. That was the right thing to do, and then we ruined it. It's just sort of this idea of like what a child thinks when they get in trouble. It's just like, all right, then I'm running away, and they just like pack up their bag. They're like, I don't want to get in trouble for this, so this is gonna be my life now. I'm gonna head out on the road.
Right. Yeah.
And then on page 186, so it says starting with the paragraph kind of in the middle of the page, truth schmooth. Captain Sham said, if you don't care about something, one thing to demonstrate your feelings is to say the word and then repeat the word with the letters SCHM, replacing the real first letters. Somebody who didn't care about dentists, for instance, could say dentist schmentis. Schmenstis? Oh my goodness, that's hard to say. But only a despicable person like Captain Sham wouldn't care about the truth. Truth schmooth, he said again. I think Mr. Poe is more likely to believe the owner of a respectable sailboat rental place who went out in the middle of a hurricane to rescue these ungrateful boat thieves. So it says only a despicable person like Captain Sham wouldn't care about the truth. Like, he's dismissing the truth and saying, oh, who cares about this, right? Okay, it's interesting, though, because first of all, these books are fiction. So,
right.
By definition, it's not the truth, right?
Right.
It's not real events. So it's like, if you care about these, like, you're a despicable person.
Right.
Because you don't care about the truth. This is not truthful in the sense that this is not real life. These are not real events. If you are a good person, you're going to read biography. You're going to read nonfiction. But if you are a despicable person, you're going to really appreciate fiction, which is strange for him. Like, it's because I'm just saying, like, that's what fiction is.
Right. Well, I mean, at the same time, it says that you wouldn't care about the truth, not that you would only care for falsehoods.
I guess.
So I guess as like fiction is fine in moderation as long as you still agree with truth.
But then what happens is, but we've seen that Snicket is playing with the truth as well, where he's speculating. So these books are fictional. Snicket is an invented character, a persona that Handler's taking on. And then from there, he's trying to document the truthful events of what happens to the Baudelaire children. So within this universe, he is acting as a documentarian, whereas as a journalist, trying to get to the truth. And he wants to reveal this truth to the world. But then we've seen him playing with the truth in this. Right. That he's not always telling us the truth. And at certain points you go, oh, that's an exaggeration, or he doesn't know, so he's inventing details. And then it's like, so you don't care about the truth, but you have set yourself up as somebody whose job it is. You're taking on this role, this responsibility to document the truth of what happens to them. So it's just, I think there's some stuff going on metafictionally there, where it's this interesting comment about the series and the role of a narrator and a persona and how important it is to tell the truth. And in other words, I don't think that Snicket believes that. Forget about him. Right. I'm saying Snicket himself, I don't think believes that only a despicable person couldn't or wouldn't care about the truth.
Right.
Because he's playing with fast and loose with the truth.
That's true. Yeah. No, that is really interesting.
Yeah, I don't know what to do with it beyond that, but just something's going on with that, and it's puzzling to me, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all that I had for that chapter.
All right. So for me on page 190, um, then oh man, we get this fantastic comeuppance for Aunt Josephine. Um, and I mean fantastic in the sense that it is fantastical and not in the sense of, oh, this is great that it happened.
Right.
Um, but yes, her pointing out the grammatical error. You said, but you hadn't been a very trustworthy person. But you should have said, you haven't been a very trustworthy person. Captain Sham's one shiny eye blinked and his mouth curled up in a terrible smile. Thank you for pointing that out, he said, and took one last step toward Aunt Josephine. Sonny growled at him, and he looked down in one swift gesture, moved his peg leg, and knocked Sonny to the other end of his boat. Let me make sure I completely understand the grammatical lesson, he said to the Baudelaire's trembling guardian, as if nothing had happened. You wouldn't say Josephine Anwhistle had been thrown overboard to the Leeches, because that would be incorrect. But if you said Josephine Anwhistle has been thrown overboard to the Leeches, that would be all right with you? Yes, Aunt Josephine said. I mean, no, I mean.
Right.
I just think that that is an instance uh, where Count Olaf is showing his uh, conniving, uh, clever conniving side. Do you know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
He's set that up so quickly of like, okay, this is how I'm going to get you to say that you're
Yes.
fine with being left here.
Yes.
Um,
It is
yeah,
very clever, and clever in the sense that he is able to very, very quickly turn that in his favor.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and yeah, I mean, it's interesting because she's constantly pointing out issues with grammar, and then he is. So you think that he's going to back away from this semantic argument because that
yeah,
really seems to be what it is. It's not even so much grammatical; it's semantics and like equivocating on this point. And then he's like, "Okay, I'll play this game." But it's kind of like in The Dark Knight, where Joker's got Rachel, and she's like holding her over the edge, and then Batman shows up and he's like,
right.
let go of her. He's like, very poor choice of words. And then he just lets
Yeah,
go of her and is like, that's not really what you wanted to happen, but you said it, so now I'll
yeah,
go along with it. Yeah, it's
yeah,
yeah, like little jerk kids do that all the time, right?
right.
Like
Yes.
especially when they're arguing with a parent or a babysitter, then they'll take somebody too literally in order to get their way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I just really liked that moment. And then on page bottom of 192 into 193, um, I just think that this is a really nice moment. The three orphans huddled together, shivering in cold and fear, as Captain Sham sailed the boat by himself. They didn't dare do anything but hope. Their feelings for Aunt Josephine were all a tumble in their minds. The Baudelaires had not really enjoyed most of their time with her. Not because she cooked horrible cold meals, or chose presents for them that they didn't like, or always corrected the children's grammar, but because she was so afraid of everything that she made it impossible to really enjoy anything at all. And the worst of it was, Aunt Josephine's fear had made her a bad guardian. A guardian is supposed to stay with children and keep them safe, but Aunt Josephine had run away at the first sign of danger. A guardian is supposed to help children in times of trouble, but Aunt Josephine practically had to be dragged out of Curdled Cave when they needed her. And a guardian is supposed to protect children from danger, but Aunt Josephine had offered the orphans to Captain Sham in exchange for her own safety. But despite all of Aunt Josephine's faults, the orphans still cared about her. She had taught them many things, even if most of them were boring. Um, and then we get, just a little bit more into that. But it's it's really interesting that we're seeing a few things here. One is that um, Lemony Snicket is making his opinions on what a guardian should be very,
Hmm.
very clear.
Hmm.
Um, he's saying a guardian is supposed to do these things. And I feel like for a lot of children reading this, then they could, see this and be like, oh, well, at least my parents do that. Do you know?
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like I think that that's really interesting. And
Yes.
also the fact that the Baudelaires cared for their guardian, even though they were a bad guardian. And that's just, a little profundity on life um, of, this person does provide for you. So
Yeah.
it's a certain level of respect and um, yeah, just general familial love that exists unconditionally.
Yes. Because it's certainly the case even for children who are living with an abusive parent. They still
Mhm.
care for the parent, even if there is abuse going on. They still love them. And that makes it complicated, right? Because then the
Yeah,
feelings end up being conflicted of, I care for this person, but I know that they're really dangerous in a lot of ways and hurtful in a lot of ways, but I still want them in my life, right? That's
yeah,
a really, really tough thing. And yeah, it is. It's good that they. Um, I like that commentary that you get there. The other thing is, and I mean, you know the answer to this, but I don't. But is Aunt Josephine dead?
I will refrain from commenting, which I
Yeah,
promise does not mean one thing or another.
right.
Um,
I'm gonna say no.
regardless of whether or not she is, then I would still refrain from comment, just because, yeah, I will leave it as is.
Right, but I'm just saying, like, because this is my experience of reading it for the first time, and the first time, like, it did seem surprising because I actually bought it the first time. But like, I thought,
Right.
oh, okay, I guess she really is like she got, and it's not because I thought that she killed herself, but it's like obviously Count Olaf threw her through the window and she tumbled to her death, but there was no body, right?
Right.
That we know that he does murder.
Yeah.
Because we saw that with Uncle Monty. So I'm like, oh, okay, so he murdered her. But then in this case, but in the first case there was no body, so then it's like, okay, then you know, you find out that she's still alive. In this case, we don't see her actually die, like it's not
Yeah.
described in the text, and Olaf is not there to murder her.
Right.
So it
I'll
seems like
I'll say this much. As far as I recall, she is not seen again.
really.
Yeah.
So was that him just, you know, trying to, I don't know, not depict that kind of death in the text to make it a little bit easier for kids or something?
Potentially,
Or
yeah,
she's
I'm
just
I'm
so cowardly that she's just going to live in hiding for the rest of her life?
right. Yeah, that could be too. I don't know. I was actually surprised by the way that he leaves it because I feel like both the film version as well as the Netflix series make it clearer that she did actually die there.
Right.
Whereas this feels like it leaves it a little bit more open, and yeah, it's very
Well,
odd. The
even the kids say it. They're like, she's got a chance. She's a strong swimmer. She's got life jackets.
Yeah, and then the only thing is that like uh, that they find like the uh, salvagers or whatever find
Yeah.
the remains of the life jackets, but yeah, yeah, it's very interesting that he leaves it that way. But again, as far as I recall, she does not appear again in the series.
Okay. That's interesting. So it's just she's Schrodinger's cat.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
or the Boba Fett of this series.
Right. Right. All right. Why don't you go over what you have for chapter 13? I've only got one comment and it's a brief one.
All right. Okay, so my first comment is just basically all of page 204, um, where Count Olaf's fake wooden leg has been chewed off, and then um, uh, Just at the top of the page, he twisted his face to make it look as astonished as Mr. Poe's. My leg, Count Olaf cried in a voice of false joy. My leg has grown back. It's amazing. It's wonderful. It's a medical miracle. Oh, come now, Mr. Poe said, folding his arms. That won't work. Even a child can see that your peg leg was false. But you didn't.
Right, right.
um, a child did see it, Violet whispered to Klaus. 3 children, in fact. Well, maybe the peg leg was false, Count Olaf admitted and took a step backward. But I've never seen this tattoo in my life. Oh, come now, Mr. Poe said again. That won't work either. You tried to hide the tattoo with the peg leg, but now we can see that you are really Count Olaf. Well, maybe the tattoo is mine, Count Olaf admitted and took another step backward. But I'm not this Count Olaf person. I'm Captain Sham. See, I have a business card here that says so. Oh, come now, Mr. Poe said yet again. That won't work. Anyone can go to a print shop and have cards made that say anything they like. Well, maybe I'm not Captain Sham, Count Olaf admitted, but the children still belong to me. Josephine said that they did. Oh, come now, Mr. Poe said for the 4th and final time. That won't work. Aunt Josephine left the children to Captain Sham, not to Count Olaf, and you are Count Olaf, not Captain Sham. Whew. I love this exchange so much. It's just finally Mr. Poe is seemingly coming to his senses of once things have been laid out unequivocally before him, then he's able to be like, okay, come on, I'm smarter than that. But it's like you're you're really not though.
But
And I
he's not.
love
That's the
yeah,
thing.
and I love that Count Olaf just keeps going further and further with this deception or attempted deception, which
Yes.
is again exactly what a child would do, you know,
Yes.
an evil child. Okay, well maybe I did that, but I didn't do this. And it's like, really?
Right.
Yeah, it's just it's fun to see Count Olaf more or less portrayed as a child bully or something, you know, or
Yeah, that is a good way of describing him in that instance. And I don't know, it's to me it's tiresome with Mr. Poe, and we're on only book 3, but it's tiresome
yeah,
that he like 3 times now he is completely fooled and then is completely seeing through Count Olaf's scheme.
right.
And then it's like, but he just do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
he gets to be a fool for much of the book, and then he gets to have a spine and some backbone, and will stand up to him. And
yeah.
yeah.
Well, maybe there's some foreshadowing here. I don't know if I remember well enough to say or not, but with Mr. Poe said for the 4th and final time.
Right. Right.
Hopefully, after the 4th book, or at least the 4th disguise, then he, won't have to say, "Oh, come now" anymore.
Yeah.
um, yeah. All right. And so the only other comment that I had was on page 211. Um, so we get a nice little bit of foreshadowing here in the top paragraph. About the time when the Baudelaire orphans were forced to attend a miserable boarding school. And of course, book the 5th is titled The Austere Academy.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's just nice to see that, considering, it shows that he did have more of a plan for the series than I think many would have initially thought.
Right. Right.
Um, yeah, and then just at the bottom, and then it does say 2 fishermen found both of Aunt Josephine's life jackets, all in tatters and floating alone in the murky waters of Lake Lachrymose. So we do have that little bit of a, oh, okay, I guess she's gone, but it's certainly not the same as what we left off with Uncle Monty, where he was
Yeah,
dead.
there's a straight up body. That's why I think it's confusing. Like I'm puzzled by this because he doesn't seem Snicket or Handler doesn't seem reluctant to include a dead body, or to show, like, to
hmm
really depict a death in the text directly. that it has to be an indirect, vague kind of reference to it. He doesn't seem to be scared to do that, at least from the second book. But then in this, then it's almost like he's hiding it. But then the thing is, if there's no body, you literally did this in this book with this specific character where you made it seem like she was dead and you told us that she was dead, but we didn't see a body. And then it's like, she's not dead. So in this case, to not see a body again, then it's like, you just tricked all of us, whether like you fell for the trick or not. It was the attempt to deceive everybody into believing that she was genuinely dead. Without really having a lot of evidence, because like the life jackets that are in tatters is the exact same thing as a broken window.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, so it's fine. It's just, it's interesting that that he leaves it like that, and that that's why I'm saying that I'm sure that she's still alive, and I figured that she would come back up in the series, because why else would you have her like die like that? Yeah. Like, why not just, and then like the leeches, knocked against the boat, or he threw her into like all the leeches going after her and they ate her up.
Right. Yeah.
And if these books really were as gruesome and terrible, as unfortunate as he likes to pretend, then you would think you would get a death like that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, again, as far as I remember, in both the filmatic and the Netflix series, it's much more direct with, she's dead. They'll never see her again.
I mean, I guess unless maybe Handler wasn't sure if he wanted to bring her back, because you had just said that he, it shows that he's got at least somewhat of a plan for the series, but maybe that was one of those, maybe I'll work her back into the story at some point.
Yeah.
And then he just never did it.
I could definitely see a point in which she would have been able to come back. But yeah. And then I do also just like the comment that Count Olaf, the villain, again on the same page 211, Count Olaf, the villain, had not succeeded with his evil plan, but he certainly hadn't been defeated either. I like that, because that is... I think what a lot of people get confused by if I say that, like, I don't really like happy endings, or I don't always like happy endings. And then they're like, oh, why do you want to be crying at the end? And it's like, well, that doesn't mean that I have to be crying at the end. Like, just because the heroes didn't win doesn't mean that the villain won either.
Yeah.
There is kind of this middle ground where it's just like, oh, you know what? Like, the villain didn't succeed.
Right.
But he also wasn't defeated. I just think that that's a really nice way of putting that.
Yeah. I forget, I cannot remember for the life of me what episode it is, but an early episode of The Simpsons, and Homer says, so is this a happy ending or a sad ending? And then Marge is like, it's an ending. That's enough.
Right. Yes.
It's just like, whatever. It doesn't always have to fit into one or the other.
Yeah, as long as it's a satisfying conclusion.
Yeah, there's a resolution to things to some degree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I get that.
Yeah. So that was those were my only comments from chapter 13.
Okay. The only one I have is on page 212. And this is where Snicket is talking about morals of different stories. So the middle paragraph on that page. But even if they could go home, it would be difficult for me to tell you what the moral of the story is. In some stories, it's easy. The moral of The Three Bears, for instance, is never break into someone else's house. Okay, that seems fair enough. The moral of Snow White is never eat apples. Okay, you missed it, but all right. The moral of World War I is never assassinate Archduke Ferdinand. Like, all right, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, a little bit of history thrown in there. All right, thanks.
Right, it's a fun little thing. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, because I'm not even thinking as like a kid. Like a kid will not get that at all. I've taught, in part because I taught Canadian history, so everybody knows that is like the match that lit the tinderbox of World War I, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and it's just funny because like everybody who studies it knows that's what set it off, and then it's like, well, just don't do it again. It's just such a funny thing. It's like, well, he's dead, so he can't do it again. So that would therefore, by that logic, prevent World War I from happening again. And it's like, well, yeah, because there can't be another World War I.
Right.
There will never be another World War I.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
no, and I do really like that because it is framing World War One as a story, which of course it is. Like history is stories of the past, and they are stories as much as they are, truthful. Uh, you know,
we do narrativize
mhm.
is like that's what the discipline of history ends up doing is it turns events like into sequences that are
Yeah.
logical and like you learn like from narrative studies of what a good narrative is and then you say well that's how people like to learn about things they like being told a story
Yeah.
and so a historian will selectively choose events in order to turn it into a compelling narrative at least a lot
Yeah.
of good historians will do that so yeah that is kind of that's a good point too that like just putting it in there it's an interesting thing because I mean I feel like it shouldn't be as fun and interesting to me as it is because it's just
Right.
on the one hand it's just a throwaway little thing but even equating World War One with the like the moral of the Three Bears or Snow White and then saying yeah and the moral of World War One and it's just it's
Yeah.
to reduce World War One to that is, I think, we're like 102 years since the end of it. So has that been enough time to be able to laugh about this? Just say that you can reduce it to a simple moral lesson, like a fairy tale.
Right.
Um, yeah, in any case, he does. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, because that's an interesting thing. Like, just like I said, because I've taught it before and I know it really well, and like anybody who understands what happened with World War One, then it's like, well, what if Franz Ferdinand did not get assassinated? What would have happened then? And I think most historians would say it would have started eventually because
Yeah.
of everything that was going on. But yeah, but that's a funny little moral that you get from there. I would say like the moral would be trench warfare doesn't work.
Right.
Isn't that the moral of World War One? Well, maybe not the moral, but one of the lessons that we should learn from it. Trench
Yeah,
warfare is
yeah.
going to ensure a lot of people die and nothing's going to happen.
Right. Yeah, no, it's really fun. Like this passage is really fun in that because of course um we know that sure, the moral of the Three Bears, never break into someone else's house.
Yeah,
Okay. But
yeah,
yeah, then that Snow White, never eat apples. It's like, no, that's not right. And it's
exactly.
like
It's
World War One. I think you're
yes,
just way off a
no,
cliff there.
way off. Yeah, you're right. You're not really right, but you're not that far off, I guess. And then this
Right.
one is just you couldn't be more off.
Yeah. I don't think that's a moral or anything.
No,
Like,
that's even calling it a moral is such a weird thing to do to say. So I'm like, it delighted me because
oh,
it's so
absolutely.
wrong.
Yeah.
So that really worked
Yeah.
for me.
And it
But
is
yeah,
interesting because I think that this story, like this book in particular, does seem to have a moral of don't be so afraid of everything that
yeah,
give up on the people you care about.
absolutely.
And yet he doesn't, really go into that. He says, I don't really know what the moral is. And it's like, well, clearly you don't know what morals are anyway. So,
Right, right,
so
exactly.
that's not surprising that you can't pinpoint one in this story.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, are we good then with book the third, The Wide Window?
Yeah, I think so. So we do have the letter to the editor. We are getting
Yeah.
into the miserable mill is the next one. Um, I'm curious about your expectations for it.
Um, well, yeah, I don't really have much in the way of expectations. I feel like he's done, like, it's pretty transparent of what it sure seems to be the case where Snicket and really Handler has got his formula
Mhm.
of get them in a new place, a new guardian, they adjust, then Count Olaf devises some kind of scheme, often involving a disguise, and none of the adults are going to believe them, and they, of course, can entirely see through Olaf's plans, but are entirely incapable of stopping him, and and then he's going to run away at the end.
Yeah.
And maybe a guardian will die along the way. I mean, I'm only 3 books into this, but that seems to be the formula here. And I guess the point here is I don't have an issue with them being formulaic, because I'll push back on that idea of something's bad because it follows a formula. It's, well, only if you believe that the purpose of reading is to consume a plot. But these books are not really about the plot. That's basically my attitude. I don't care about the plot. It's these funny little asides that you get along the way, and it's the humor, the comedy that you get that comes from the plot elements, but they're not plot driven.
Right? It's great to hear you say that, because like when we were talking about the first book, then you were like, these asides are going to get really tiring really quickly, and it's like, yeah, they're actually getting better.
They are getting better. They are getting better. I will say that. And I'm hoping that my only expectation, I guess, would be that he keeps it up with that, because he seems to be getting better at the asides in each book. That they're getting more clever because he's able to play with these things that he's set up along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We will get a little bit of a twist on the formula for the Miserable Mill. I'll say that much.
All right.
And basically moving forward, we're going to be moving into slightly different territory, which is good. I always think of the first 3 books as establishing the formula, and then basically the next 3 books are challenging it.
Gotcha.
So yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. That's a nice way of doing it. You saw that like with Harry Potter, for instance. Then it's very much there seems to be a formula, but then as the books go on, then it's like, okay, that formula starts to get challenged.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Well, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you get started on The Miserable Mill, chapters 1 to 4, for next Wednesday, when we're going to be feeling very woeful again. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Ignore the tattoo! A phrase here which means like, comment, subscribe, and share this podcast across the web. That may seem like a strange definition, but in this context, it is entirely accurate.